Let's cultivate our motivation to learn about monastic life, to explore that possibility for ourselves, and to do that because there's a very deep yearning inside to make our lives meaningful and to make them meaningful for all living beings. So let's generate the bodhicitta intention, very far-reaching, very expansive motivation for doing what we're doing. Okay, so we're about to start our Exploring Monastic Life course. This is one of my favorite courses throughout the year because I can say whatever I want. Meaning I don't have to walk on eggshells and say things in nice, sweet ways so that people will feel good. Yeah, I can say things very bluntly, very straightforward. Because, sometimes people come to the Dharma and it's like I'm supposed to do some interviews, and one of the questions was, what is your advice for lay people who want to practice, but they have very busy lives and they're too busy to practice? Now, how do you answer that question? Yeah? If you're too busy to practice, why are you asking me how to practice? Yeah? If Dharma isn't your priority, why are you asking me how to sneak it in? Yeah. So we deleted that question. I'm not going to respond to that one. But, if I were to respond, I would respond just like that, kind of, please be thoughtful. Yeah. And if Dharma is important, make your life so you have time for it. And if Dharma is not important, don't ask me how to practice it. Yeah. So, and similarly about relationships, when I'm teaching other courses, then people always ask, how can you have a romantic relationship without attachment? Love that question. Okay. For people who are exploring monastic life, they don't ask that question. Yeah. If you're genuinely exploring monastic life, you're not looking for a romantic relationship. And you're, you should be seeing attachment as a disadvantage and start to be able to distinguish love from attachment. Yeah. So I don't feel obliged in EML to give advice on how to have romantic relationships without attachment, because that's asking me, pretty much how do you have wasps without stingers? The two kind of come together in ordinary beings. I mean, if you're an Arya, it's a different situation, So there are certain people who are very advanced on the path, and that's fine. But for the rest of us, come on. Yeah? So let's just be honest about it. Okay, so that's why I like this course, because I can just I can just say it like that because people came here to explore monastic life. Yeah, they didn't come here for, I don't think you came here for feel-good Buddhism or for Buddhism light, where I can make an app and you can play your app and do your meditation practice like that. No, okay? We're kind of looking at the Dharma seriously here in this course. And so that's what makes it very nice for me. Yeah. Nice for you? I don't know. Maybe you'll get mad at some of the things I say. Yeah. If you get mad, that's good. Yeah. If you don't like the things I say, then the Dharma's having some effect on your mind. It's the same if you hear Buddhist teachings and they don't rattle you inside, then, something's not hitting. But if they rattle us, then, we wake up and we start looking at our minds and start seeing what's going on. Okay? Because you'll notice, our teachers, the first Dharma lesson is not about light, love, and bliss. And the Buddha's first teaching, that he gave to his disciples, the Four Noble Truths. What's the first one? Yeah, dukkha. Yeah, unsatisfactory conditions. Buddha didn't start out with his disciples, light, love, bliss. Buddha started out with, let's look at how things are. On a conventional level, let's be frank about how they are. On an ultimate level, let's be frank about they are. And, we're not here to pussyfoot around or try to impress anybody or whatever. Yeah? And so that's why I think, when we hear the teachings and they really make us go like, oh, wow, because we have some bad habit kind of going along with how we're thinking. And then we hear the Dharma and, what the Buddha's saying is like going boing to our bad habit or to our button, then it's having some effect. Yeah. Of course, when our buttons are pushed, we don't like it very much, So that's why we have a driveway and we talk about people running down the hill. Yeah. You get fed up with it here. You just run down the hill, and then you get to the bottom of the road, and you look this way, and you look that way, and your mind is still with you, and then you have to walk back up the hill. Yeah. Okay. So, that's what I really appreciate about the Buddha's teachings is, the Buddha was very straightforward and gave a very complete, exact analysis about how things work, are and how they work. And, why do my buttons get pushed? Because of my own ignorance that is holding all sorts of wrong conceptions that are the opposite of what the Buddha taught. So am I going to listen to my wrong conceptions and defend them? Or am I going to start to question my wrong conceptions and see if I can, make my mind happy? Because whenever we reject reality, we're rejecting reality, then, who's going to win, our wrong conceptions or reality? Okay, so, for example, when the Buddha said, phenomena are impermanent, and we go, oh, yes, my suffering's impermanent, that's good. Oh, but my dear relatives that I love are impermanent. My life is impermanent. My social status is impermanent. My youth and health are impermanent. And then we want to go back to, what is it? Ignorance is bliss, and pretend that those things don't exist. But, you can see we can see by looking around at all the people we encounter that when people don't like, for example, the reality of impermanence, they totally freak out. They don't have a way to handle it. And you can see the amazing suffering they experience. Yeah? And when we don't see, what is by nature dukkha or unsatisfactory, when we don't see that for what it is, and we think that we're going to find happiness and satisfaction from it, the whole world is full of people like that, and they aren't happy. We all talk about the president nowadays. Do you think he's a happy individual? Yeah? I mean, do happy people talk like he talks? You might be rich, you might be famous, but does that mean you're happy? Okay? So I think we have to, let the teachings hit our heart and question how we're holding things. Yeah? And where our mind shuts down and says, I don't like that. Yeah. I don't like, the body, the foulness of the body. Oh, this is the one people really can't stand, And you hear about the foulness of the body. We don't like that at all. I reject that. I refuse to look at the foulness of the body. My body is pure. The person I'm sexually attracted to, their body is pure. I am just not listening to that. It's not true. Yeah, and our mind shuts down. It's like, but why do we shut down with so much force, so much vehemence? Because it's touching. Yeah, because it's touching, because our grasping is getting challenged. Okay, so to notice that when it happens and to welcome it. It's a chance to really look closely and try and tune our mind to reality. Yeah, like when people don't do what you want them to do. Do you have a problem with that? The people in your life don't do what you want them to do? You don't have a problem with it? People in my life don't do what I want them to do. I just look around at all these monastics, It's like, who are you telling me what to do? Then I go, you should listen to what I say. Everybody should follow my advice. If you did, then the whole world would be perfect. And they don't listen. Yeah? The grasshoppers don't listen to my advice. The cats don't listen to my advice. The turkeys don't listen. Yeah, and the human beings don't listen. Yeah. So, I can either fight reality, which I've done for a long time, saying, but you must. Or I can say, oh, the reality of the world is I don't have control over it. Oh, duh. But I should have control over it. Well, that's nice. Shoulds are very nice, but shoulds have nothing to do with reality. Do they? Shoulds have nothing to do with reality. So the reality is I can't control other living beings. So I need to accept that. As much as I don't like it, and I'm going to keep trying to force them to do what I want them to do. And that's a way to be very miserable, isn't it? Yeah, when we keep trying to make people do what we want them to do. Okay, so in the first day of EML, I always like to give a little bit of history and, talk a little bit about the Buddha's life and then the spread of the Dharma. So you have some historical background. And I do this because lots of times we think that ordination is just a matter of keeping precepts and wearing robes. Yeah, that's what happens in the ordination ceremony. You've put on funny looking clothes, and then you take all these precepts, so you can't do this and you can't do that, and you can't do the other thing. Okay, and that's what lots of people think ordination is. And that's not what it's about. Yeah, you change clothes, you change your hairdo, and you accept precepts voluntarily. But that's not the whole thing about monastic life. That's just one part of it, one facet of it. And so I think talking about the history and the background and how the Buddha set up the Sangha and so on gives more of a complete view. Yeah. And also talking a little bit about the history of Buddha spreading into different countries, because that's also what we're dealing with right now, is transcultural, transcultural transportation or something. We're bringing the Buddhism to new lands. Okay, so I think you all probably know the Buddha's life story. There's some elements of it that really touch me very much because they let me know that the Buddha, by his life story, understands some of what I've gone through in my life. Okay. So the Buddha was born, to a princely family. And the soothsayers said he would either become a great political leader or a great religious leader. And Mom and Dad, of course, wanted him to become a great political leader. They didn't want him to become a religious leader, because parents want their children to have wealth, they want their children to have social status, and they take a certain pride in what their children become. So that if, you're a parent and your child becomes somebody that is praised by other people in society, then you feel like you were a good parent, a successful parent. And also you love your child a lot and you want your child to be happy. You don't want your child to suffer. And as a parent, you have a certain idea of what happiness is. So you try and create those conditions for your children to get happiness the way you think happiness should be gotten, and so that it's the kind of happiness that you think is the best kind. But also as parents, you can't control when you have a kid. It's totally pot luck. You cannot control what you get, because the kids come in with different karma. So the Buddha's family, if he had been born, in our century, maybe they would have wanted him to become a Wall Street banker or a lawyer who went into politics or, who knows what. But the idea was he grew up in a family where there was a whole lot of social pressure. So there was pressure from the family of who he should be, what he should do, how he should find happiness. There was pressure from society. They expected certain things of the son of the king, even though it was just a small republic and it wasn't a big kingdom or anything. Okay, so when you look in your life, did you have pressure from your family to do certain things or become certain things or not do certain things? Yeah. Did you have pressure from society? Maybe, the social group or extended family you were in? Yeah. Pressure about what you should do and be? Yeah. So the Buddha faced that same thing. Yeah. Our experience isn't so unique. It's painful, but it's not so unique. And so the Buddha's family kept him very sheltered. Yeah, he wasn't allowed to go out into town to see what life was like because they were afraid that, he would run away and follow his spiritual interests. So they kept him busy. Yeah, he went to the elite boys' school. He joined the soccer team. He, went to Harvard and, excelled in the whole thing. I mean, you're just looking at what was possible in his life and what it would become nowadays, and that's it. Yeah, and so he just excelled. I mean, we have a little group at the Abbey. It's called the High Achievers Neurotic Society. Okay, and it's for children who were high achievers as kids, and were still children. Um, yeah, with this kind of pressure to succeed. And so, the Buddha really had that, and was very difficult for him to move around. Yeah. When you were a teenager, did you have difficulty going out and doing what you wanted to do because your parents were looking after you and wanted you to stay home and study, or wanted you to do this and not do that? Did you sneak out when your parents weren't looking, or almost sneak out? Did you lie to your parents when you were going to do one thing but actually you're going to do another because you couldn't tell them the truth because they get mad at you and tell you couldn't do it? Okay, so was kind of the Buddha's situation too. Yeah, he had to sneak out with his charioteer and go into town and look around at what was happening. And he saw an old person, a sick person, and a dead person. And he had never seen these before because his parents were so overprotective that he, couldn't see the reality of life. Basically, he lived in a gated community, okay? And he wasn't allowed to go outside the gated community. And when he did, he was shocked by what he saw. Okay, and that made him think, just as I think most of us, as we grew up and we ventured outside of the community in which we grew up in, the household we grew up in, and we started meeting people who thought differently and looked differently and did different things. Yeah. And how we didn't want to necessarily let our parents know, but it was quite surprising to us, and we had to really grow up. So I think, there's a parallel between that and what the Buddha had to do too. Yeah. So he, he followed all the pressure. And he was a good athlete and a good scholar. He got married to the beautiful woman. God forbid he marry somebody who wasn't the most beautiful one. And he had a child, and, he did everything mom and dad wanted. And he wasn't happy. Yeah, he wasn't happy. He knew something was missing from his life. And so that's why on the fourth time he went out, when he saw a wandering mendicant, somebody who was intent on spiritual practice and on overcoming samsara, he went, wow, you mean it's possible to do that? You mean there's a bigger meaning in life besides all these gala parties with all my dancing girls and everything like that? You mean there's some deeper meaning? Yeah. But he knew he couldn't stay in his family situation and explore that deeper meaning. There just wasn't the space. Yeah. And so he left in the middle of the night. Yeah. And he went out and he cut off his long hair. He took off his jewelry. He took off all of his designer clothes. And he put on basically a pair of jeans, but not designer ones. Okay. And then he set out to look for somebody who could teach him about life and how to go beyond the cycle of birth and death. So he wandered around for a while. And then he found one teacher who taught him different meditations in the states of the dhyanas, the form realm meditations, which he mastered. And then that teacher said, you know, you've mastered what I have to teach. Come and co-lead the community with him. So he was going to get a promotion and become the leader of the spiritual community. Just what mom and dad want. You know, it's like, well, if he's going to be a flake and run off, at least he's the leader of the flakes. Okay. So, yeah. So he refused to do that because he knew it wasn't liberation. He went and he found another teacher who taught him about how to actualize the formless realm absorptions. He did that. That teacher also asked him to share the leadership of the community. He again refused because he was really intent on liberation. He wasn't seeing Dharma as a career. He wasn't trying to be a famous monastic, you know, with his photo on tricycle and, you know, a list of all the meditation apps that he's done. And the way Jeffrey was joking with us today about, you know, here's my new book. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but it'd be really good if you read it. You know, so Buddha wasn't trying to do that. Yeah, he was just really sincerely looking for liberation. So he left that teacher too, and then he met up with 5 other wandering ascetics, and he went to this one place where they practiced very strict meditation, and he did that for 6 years, eating 1 grain of rice a day, so that when he touched his belly button, he could feel his spine. Okay, because in India at that time, and even in many religions nowadays, asceticism is viewed very highly as a way to cut off attachment, isn't it? I mean, even in Catholicism, the whole idea of self-flagellation and so on, you know, if you make the body suffer, then you tame it, you cut off attachment. So he practiced like that for 6 years, and found out that you can, you know, torture the body, but it doesn't liberate the mind. And so he said goodbye to his friends, and he went off and sat down under another tree and meditated. And this woman came by and thought he was a spirit and offered him some food. And when his 5 friends heard about that, they were scandalized. It's like, wait, we're all, ascetics, and you ate a bowl of rice? Boy, what are you doing? You completely lost yourself. And so, he had to put up with disdain from his very good friends. Then he crossed the river and went and sat under the Bodhi tree and said he wasn't going to get up until he attained liberation, which is very brave because it could take a while. Yeah. But fortunate for him, by the next morning, he had attained liberation. And they talk about, the trials that Mara, who was the anthropomorphized aspect of our afflictions, the challenges that Mara put in front of him. So first he was meditating, and it looked like there were all these armies coming. It was like, Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-un and the Iranian leader, and they're all coming in with their nuclear weapons, and he's trying to meditate. And he didn't react in anger, and he didn't react in fear. And because of that, all their nukes turned to flowers and fell down. Yeah. We should try that sometime when someone's criticizing us, when somebody's hurting us. Yeah. To generate loving kindness for them and see if their words and their actions turn into flowers and gently fall down on us. And then later in that night, Mara sent all of his daughters. It was like the nightclub. It was Stormy Daniels time 1,000. Okay. And, going there, and the Buddha just sat and meditated. Yeah. He didn't start going. Yeah. He just kept on with his meditation. And then they disappeared. They became old hags, which Stormy and Karen McDougal, that's what's going to happen to them someday too, and Melania. So, so the point is he dealt with everything in his mind, all the anger, all the attachment that came up, all this is normal. Now, when you're trying to practice the path, all this junk coming up is completely normal. That's what happens. But we see from the example of the Buddha's life that he dealt with it by not running away from it, but by being able to look squarely at what was coming at him and understand it. And understand its conventional nature, understand the ultimate nature, and so not get befuddled by all the distractions of the world. And so he became a Buddha. Yeah. And for 7 weeks after that, he walked around, in Bodh Gaya, kind of wondering what to do. And he wanted to teach, but he thought, who in the world is going to understand me? So this whole world is so confused by attachment and anger and jealousy and competitiveness. And, nobody's going to understand me if I talk about what I've learned in my meditation. And so then the gods, Indra and Brahma and so forth, came and humbly requested him to teach. So that's like, the leaders of the G7, the Security Council, the Pope, all the important people in the world going and asking him please to teach. And so he thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And he looked around for who to teach, because his first thought was his two teachers, yeah. But he realized that through his psychic powers that they had both just passed away. And then he thought of his 5 friends that he practiced austerities with, and he saw that they were in Benares. So he started walking to Benares. And when his friends saw him approach, they all kind of went, there's that flake Gautama, let's just ignore him. He's a cop-out. But somehow as the Buddha came, just his presence was very strong, and they wound up offering him a seat and, offering him something to drink and so on. And then he gave the first teaching, which was on the 4 truths. And some of those 5 disciples, they all had various realizations, either at that time or in the next few days. And then he started, going other places, and people asked him to teach. And so according to the mentality of the people that he met, then he gave certain teachings. So it wasn't like he had an organized curriculum all set up. And, he taught the first class here and the second class there. Then they had a quiz. Then they had the 3rd class and the 4th class. And then they had a final exam, right? Then they got their diploma. No, it wasn't set up that way at all. Yeah, he just taught according to what would benefit the people who were in front of him at that time. And so he spent 45 years doing that, walking all around. They didn't send limousines for him. Okay, so he had to walk. He wore his rag robes. He wasn't wearing big brocade. He sat on straw mats, not on big fluffy seats and thrones. And he lived basically like the disciples who followed him lived. So the people who wanted to follow him, there were lay followers, and then there were monastics there were people who wanted to become monastic followers, and they all had the same lifestyle. It was a very simple lifestyle. Okay, they didn't have all sorts of stuff. Okay, like shoes for the summer and shoes for the winter, and like we have now, you have to have so many pairs of shoes, and they have to be the right color, and they have to be comfortable, and so on. The Buddha, he walked barefoot, and very simple bedding, not like us, but we need a nice cozy comforter, and we need carpeting on the floor, and we need heating in the winter and aircon in the summer, and 8 out of bowl, just a very simple bowl, kind of like we do, except our bowls are very nicely made. They don't crack. Okay. And as was the custom in ancient India, he didn't go to Safeway and buy the food he felt like eating that day. But the custom was that you went with your bowl and you stood in front of somebody's house. You did not beg. This is a big conception. They sometimes say that the Sangha were beggars and that they had begging bowls. They didn't beg. Okay, begging involves asking somebody to give you something. They didn't do that. They weren't permitted to do that. They went with their bowls, and because it was the custom in ancient India, people, were used to wandering ascetics coming with their bowls, and they knew that they had the choice to put food in the bowls or not. And so some people put food in and some people didn't. But they didn't ask, and, they went to different and stood in front of different households. And then they had to finish their meal before noon. There were a few different reasons for that. One was that way they only went out on Pindapat once a day, because if they went out collecting alms in the morning, and then at lunchtime, and then at dinner time, it would be a big disturbance for the lay people. So they only went out once. And so that's why it was early in the day, so they went out, they collected their food, they had to eat before noontime. Also, because it was dangerous going out in the evening, going on Pindapat, in the villages, they didn't have public toilets, and the houses didn't have toilets. So everybody usually went in a field, and they didn't have street lights. So if you were walking in town at night, some monks were stepping in people's poo and all sorts of stuff, and slipping and falling in cesspools, and standing outside people's door with their alms bowl, and the people thinking that they were ghosts. So that's why there was no going for alms in the evening, and the meal had to be finished while it was still light. Okay. And so, as what was the custom in India at that time, the Buddhist disciples were not the only spiritual group. You had, on one hand, the Brahmins, who were seen as the highest class. They had families and property and so on. And then you had the wandering ascetics, these different groups of wandering ascetics. And some of them did some pretty strange practices. Yeah, there were people who came to see the Buddha that were dog ascetics or cow ascetics, meaning that they acted like dogs and cows because they thought that they were using up the karma to be born as animals. You had matted hair ascetics. Yeah, so people who never washed their hair and it grew out, and who knows what kind of living beings lived in it, nested in it. You had naked ascetics. You had, all sorts of people. I mean, it was like walking down Hollywood Boulevard. All sorts of people. And, but they were all accepted, yeah. And so the Buddha related to all these different groups. One of the main groups he talked to were the Jains. That religion still exists now. And, so the Buddha would talk with those disciples. He would debate with different people. He really was there discussing the Dharma with all sorts of different people, and he taught all sorts of different people. And no one had to pay a penny to go to the teachings, okay? It was free. Everybody could go. They could hear the Dharma to their heart's content, and, they didn't pass around a dana basket at the end, and they didn't, you didn't have to register and pay a certain amount and get a ticket. And it wasn't like the people who paid more got to sit in front. It's interesting timing when this thing goes out. Yeah. So it wasn't like the people who were rich and paid more, they got to sit in the front, and the people who didn't have any money had to sit in the back. It wasn't like that. I think the kings kind of, they pushed their way to the front, but, what to do? Everybody else kind of, they managed somehow. And it's really amazing when you read the sutras just to see how many different kinds of people the Buddha met. and what he talked to them about and what he discussed about. And you could really see in his conversations with people that he was using logic and reasoning and debating with them. Okay. And so this whole tradition that became very strong at the monastic universities such as Odantapuri and Nalanda and Vikramasila centuries later, this actually started with the Buddha, yeah, because he would go up to some Jains and say, "What were you talking about?" And they would tell him, and then he would start asking them questions and debating with him a little bit. Okay. I don't think the Buddha had the idea of starting Buddhism. Yeah, I'm going to start a world religion. They're going to name it after me. They're going to make lots of statues about me and put them in the center, and then people will, put oranges and apples. Oh, look, peaches. Yeah. And peaches, people will put peaches in front of statues of me, and they'll study about me in high school, and they'll bow to me, and so on. I don't think the Buddha had any idea like that in his mind, I will be famous forever. Yeah. Everybody will worship me. Everybody will go, "Oh, the Buddha changed my life forever." I don't think he had that in his mind at all. Yeah. Because his motivation was very pure. It was simply to benefit whoever came to see him. And he benefited them in whatever way they were receptive to being benefited. And so some people were very open. He could really teach them a lot. Other people completely closed. Yeah, other people he gave counseling to, other people he shared his food with. It was really according to, what was needed at that time. So he had this incredible sensitivity to the people around him. He, for the first 12 years, of the Sangha, and the Sangha started very quickly after he attained awakening, because his first 5 disciples became his first 5 followers. So as the Sangha started to grow, they kept up with this lifestyle, a wandering lifestyle, but also all the wandering groups at that time had to. The lay people had certain expectations, they had certain wishes, and so you had to listen to the wishes of the lay people. So although, because it was a give and take, their food, their staying alive was dependent on the lay people who made offerings. So, for example, what happened is during the monsoon time, when the rice fields were planted, all the rain is falling very heavily. This system of just being wanderers and going from place to place, when the Sangha wandered at that time, they were trampling people's rice fields. They were breaking the irrigation ditches that, were going along the rice fields. And the lay people were saying, "Hey, this isn't flying. And plus, you guys should not be harming living beings, but you're walking around during the monsoons, and there's tons of living beings, and you're stepping on them. So you're ruining our crops, you're killing living beings. It's really not so cool that you're wandering during the rainy season." And so the Buddha listened to that because the other groups, the other wanderers at that time, they had stopped wandering during the monsoon rains and they stayed put. And so then the Buddha started the custom of having the 3-month Varsa retreat. It was during the monsoon season in India, during the summer. when it was raining. And so they were to stay in one place, and there was a certain a sima or a territory marked out within which they had to stay. And so, you know, some of the lay people who had parks or forests or extra buildings, they would invite the Sangha to come and stay there for the 3 months. But then after, at the end of the 3 months, they had to go back and wander again. They weren't allowed to be settled. But there was that 3 months of settled time. And so gradually, as time went on, the monastics started to stay settled more and more, okay? And also, as Buddhism started to spread to different countries, they had to be sensitive to what the climate was, what the social conditions were, and so on in these different countries. So, for example, when Buddhism went to Tibet, wandering was really not very practical. It was cold, there was snow on the ground. A quarter of the male population were monks. If they all came into the town every day to collect food, the lay people would have been overwhelmed. Okay, so they discontinued the custom of going on Pindapat in Tibet. And instead the monastics stayed put. People would bring food to the monasteries, and then they would do cooking in the monasteries. When Buddhism went to China, when they were wearing the saffron color robes, the emperor freaked out because only the emperor was allowed to wear golden robes. So then they had to change the color of robes to what was considered an ugly color, because in India, the saffron color was considered ugly, but in China, it was considered royal. So then they had to change the color of the robes to like gray or black or brown. And then they also changed the style of the robes, because in China, the people are very modest, and showing your skin is really a no-no. I mean, even now when we go to Taiwan, we try and wear a jacket. In the Tibetan tradition, it's not allowed to cover your arms, but when we go to China, they think that you should be covered, so we wear a jacket. So as Buddhism went from one country to the other, it had to adjust to what was going on. In China also, you had the Confucian bureaucracy, you had the emperor, there everybody was jostling for power. And so Buddhism wasn't immediately accepted in China. People were very skeptical of it, especially all these people going on Pindapat. They thought that they were beggars. And then to become accepted, when they lived in the city, then the emperor and the magistrates wanted them to come over for dinner. And then you have, like what happened with the Catholic Church and the government, to keep your religious organization functioning, you had to collaborate with the government. And so the Chinese monastics didn't want anything to do with that. So they left, they went to the mountains, where they can live peacefully and didn't have to be involved in the politics in the town. But of course, there they had to farm. So even though farming was not allowed in the precepts because of the situation that they lived in, then they had to farm in order to get food. Okay. So you see this as Buddhism goes from one place to the other. The culture, the climate, all these kinds of things influence. And so you see that there's a necessity to adapt to new situations. But then there's always the thing about how do you adapt without throwing the Buddha out with the bathwater? Okay? Because, for example, what happened in Tibet is, okay, you had these huge monasteries, that's fine. You know, the monastics couldn't go to town on Pindapat because it would overwhelm the people, the householders. So then the monastics started handling money, and they would go to town and they would buy food. Or the monasteries would go to town and buy food. Or people would give the monasteries, this happened in Taiwan, in China, as well as in Tibet, they would donate land to the monasteries, and the lands had serfs working on them. And so then the monasteries had to operate these plantations, basically, and they collected taxes and revenues from the serfs living on the land. Yeah. And then they started having more dealings with money. And then, of course, you want to build a big temple for the Buddha. But, those monks over there built a really nice temple, and we want to build a temple that's nicer than their temple. So, then you get into this competition for building beautiful temples. So, there's has to be adaptation, but then how to adapt without losing the spirit of how the Buddha set the Sangha up. How do you do that? So this is a big question, and I'm sure it's one that will come up as we discuss a lot during the next few weeks here. How do we bring Buddhism to the West in an authentic way that corresponds with our culture, and yet we don't lose the essence, we don't compromise the Buddhist values and principles. So then Buddhism started spreading. It went south to Sri Lanka. It went by land routes and also water routes to China. It went to Central Asia, the area around northern Pakistan and Afghanistan, into Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, all the stans in there. That whole area was once really, Buddhism prospered so much in those areas. Yeah, and the whole line, they had two routes from there into China, the Silk Road in the north and another kind of road in the south. Maybe it was two Silk Roads, I'm not sure. But, and then Buddhism went even down into Indonesia, which was quite far away, and then into Vietnam, and went in the north into Korea and Japan, and, really spread widely around the world. And then in the 20th century, communism became the big enemy of Buddhism. And in so many countries, the Dharma was really persecuted, if not destroyed, by communist regimes. Yeah. So there's a lot to say about history, but that's brief. I wanted to leave some time now for some discussion and some Q&A.
Thank you, Venerable. So I had read somewhere that the Buddha asked that his followers don't make any statues or representations of him. Is that true? Because he didn't want them to worship him as like an idol, but to find truth within themselves?
I don't know. Does anybody know? Yeah. You read that too? Okay. Anybody else know?
One of the things I'm wondering is like that the basic part of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, the stuff that it seems like, in some ways, it seems like that hasn't changed across traditions and across time. And a lot of it is just the trappings and the way we dress and the way
Yeah.
we eat, and societal things have changed. But how have the different groups in different areas changed, or have they changed some of the basic teachings? Because I know we
Yeah.
have like is it the Nichiren Shoshu Buddhists? They have like boiled it down to just one sutra and one mantra, and I don't even know if they're really Buddhists, though they call them, well, they are. They call themselves Buddhists. They could be Buddhists. I don't know. But I know that they believe differently than other Buddhist groups. And how much difference has crept in there?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, I think that most people who have been very conscientious have tried to stick to the fundamental teachings. And although you're right, the externalities and the trappings have changed, you see that the basic teachings of the Four Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Three Higher Trainings, taking refuge, that these kind of practices exist in most of the traditions. But then you do have certain people that kind of go out on their own, and either through a leader's personal experience or something, then they teach the Dharma in their own way. So there is, a lot of discussion about what really which groups are really Buddhist nowadays and which ones have kind of adapted things a little bit too much. Yeah. But there's no governing Buddhist world body that makes those decisions. So it's basically up to individuals, which groups or teachers they align themselves with. Huh? And throughout Buddhist history, and actually throughout the history of any religion and all religions, you've had people who have strayed from the main doctrine. Yeah, you've had scandals and people who haven't kept proper ethical conduct. So this is something that, because sentient beings are sentient beings, this kind of stuff happens. But what we want to do is really keep it very clear in our heart that really for the liberating teachings to exist, we cannot and we must not change the teachings. Yeah. If we just want to perpetuate a religious institution, then you can change everything you want. And the more you change, the more people will like it because you'll make it so that it pleases their ego. Yeah, but then the teachings themselves become, the pure Dharma gets lost, put it that way. Okay. So that's why I think it's very important for us to learn the teachings and study the teachings and and meditate on them and so on, and be very conscientious ourselves in how we adjust things, so that we can adjust outer things but without changing the teachings themselves. Yeah. And it's not always so easy to tell what is the Dharma and what is culture.
Yeah.
It's not so easy. Okay. When I had been in the Tibetan community for like 11 years. And then I went to take ordination in Taiwan, and it was like, wow, where am I? I had just mastered sitting for hours cross-legged, and they stand up for hours. I was like, I can't stand up this long, I had just mastered learning, to not be, so cold like this. And then I went there, and they wear so many layers of clothes. I was just like sweating gallons, you know. I just, I had managed to learn Tibetan prostrations. Now I had to do Chinese prostrations. Yeah. And then I had just mastered, well, I never mastered butter tea, never. Momos are not my favorite. Too much starch. And then I went to Taiwan, and they served you pickles for breakfast, which I can't stand. And so, I spent so much time while I was there because there wasn't an English translation for the first 2 weeks of the program, thinking about what is Buddhism and what is culture. And that was my big meditation.
Okay, so on that question, what part of culture should be important to us? That's something I really struggle with. It's like, I have a hard time with the Tibetan culture. It's like I love the art, I kind of go along with things, but I don't really get a lot of it.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. But I love the Dharma.
Right.
And I have the connection with you because you are the teacher who taught me the Dharma. So I have this respect for the Tibetan tradition because the teachers I have met have helped me. So in some ways I like it, but then I don't really get it. I struggle with that part.
Yeah.
How much of the culture is important?
I would say none of the culture is important.
Okay.
For actual practice. For living peacefully with Tibetans, it's good to learn some of their culture. But to be a Buddhist practitioner, you don't have to learn Tibetan culture or Chinese culture or any kind of culture.
But as
Okay.
a monastic,
Huh?
as
We-
a monastic, it's expected for what reasons?
Yeah. As monastics, we have to learn a certain bit of the culture. But, for example, how we are living here is, okay, we have the Tibetan style robes, but how we live, our structure, how we organize ourselves is very Western.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're not going to have the tulku system. Yeah, we're not going to, we try and do things much more on consensus basis. So we really have to do things in a way that is according to our culture. And His Holiness, he always, because when Westerners go to Dharamsala, they all get the Western clothes, the Tibetan clothes. And when there's special events, the women wear their chubas and things like that. And His Holiness always says, you can try and be Tibetan, but there's no way because you always have a big Western nose. Yeah. So, he says just be a Westerner. And we don't have to use, we have the certain kind of bells and the drum that we use. But for other music offerings, he says you can use a guitar, you could use a piano. Yeah, why not? It's an offering of music. We don't have to blow those long horns, We don't have to use those. I don't think they even had them in India.
I don't know.
Yeah, all the brocade, I don't think they had that in India. So, those kinds of things, we can definitely change, and we don't have to make them do things, according to Tibetan culture. When we're with Tibetans, it's nice to know how to behave in a Tibetan culture so you don't offend people. So you know that when you're walking to your seat, you don't carry your shoes in your hands above people's heads, because the Tibetans freak out when they do that. It's very rude to carry your dirty shoes over somebody's head. So it's nice to know how to behave so you don't offend people when you're in that culture. But I think that kind of goes whenever, if you travel to other places, to know something about the etiquette in those places, and out of respect and kindness for the people, correspond with it. But, then on your own, you don't have to do that. I see some things that go on in Tibetan centers in the West, and I don't know, it's just, when they serve a High Lama, they put a kata around their, their mouths so that they don't breathe on the food, and I don't know, to me, that's a bit too much. Okay, but some people, it's like, okay, we'll follow Tibetan custom and we'll do it that way.
So my question is, when it comes to translating the Dharma into different languages, do you think it's important for people to understand what it was originally written in Sanskrit? Or is there, because my thought is sometimes things are lost or the essence can be lost with translation. Also, culture is infused in the translation. So do you feel it's important to understand the original written text?
Yeah, I think it never hurts to understand the original written text, okay? The Tibetans say that their translations have been done very well because they had an Indian and a Tibetan working together. So they say their translations are very accurate. I don't know because I don't understand either language. I think knowing the original language can be very, very helpful. It can be very helpful. But, everybody has their own style of translations, and some people do it very literally. Some people translate the meaning. So, everybody's going to have their own style and figure it out for themselves, I think. I think keeping it as literal as you can is good, as long as it flows and it remains inspiring. If the literalness becomes just dry words that nobody understands, then I think, that's not so good. That doesn't, because you want the scriptures to really inspire you. Yeah. But the thing is, a lot of, especially in our traditions, where they wrote things in verse form. And in Sanskrit, you write in verse form. You can leave out different words, you can leave out particles, and somehow people understand what it's meant. But you also, or at least some people understand it's meant this way. But then the verses can also be open to another interpretation. So you find translators saying, oh, it means this, and then another one saying, no, it means that. Yeah, and so some people say that's the beauty of having this poetic translation, is you can read multiple meanings into it. But other people say that's what makes it very confusing. Why don't we have something where they actually say what they mean so we're sure that we got it exactly? So you can't please everybody. Yeah.
With respect to like the literal and translation, I think me and the other Shufu were talking about this. Would you encourage a beginner to follow it literally as opposed to just on their own saying, well, I'm following the essence of it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to start out that way. And then, but to translate, you have to also understand the meaning. It's not sufficient to understand the words. Yeah, because if you don't understand the meaning or meanings in the verse, then the translation doesn't come out in a way that actually communicates with people. Yeah, I think accurate translation is quite difficult. Yeah, but I think communication among human beings is very difficult in general. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing we ever, get anything done and understand each other. So many misunderstandings.
In your decades of experience of being a nun and then an abbess, you've watched many other monastics develop. And what would you say, in your experience, is many qualities that one needs to cultivate to be a monastic? What would you say is the most important quality to being a monastic?
So, what are the most important qualities for someone to cultivate before they ordain, or as a monastic, or both?
Monastic.
To be
A good monastic.
a group monastic, a good monastic. What does good mean? I think first is the motivation. Somebody has to really have worked hard on their motivation. And it's like, I'm not here, being a monastic is not a career. I didn't ordain because I want to teach. I didn't ordain because I want to be the CEO of a monastery. I didn't ordain because, whatever. It's not a career. That our job is to learn and contemplate and meditate on the Dharma and pass it to future generations. Yeah. And so whatever we have to do that's what we do. Yeah. So to have a very clear motivation, because you meet people sometimes who say, well, I'm ordaining because I want to become a teacher. I think that is a setup for a big problem in your mind. Yeah. Because we have to be monastics because we really want to transform our minds, not because we want to become somebody. Yeah. So I think a very clear motivation is really essential. Curiosity. Yeah. Somebody who wants to learn, who will question things, who doesn't just sit there and say, tell me what to do, but who questions, who wants to learn, who's curious. Yeah. Somebody who is willing to deal with their stuff, who can endure some mental, emotional discomfort in the process of practicing. Because, mental, emotional discomfort, that's going to happen whether you're a monastic or not. When you're not a monastic, how do you deal with it? You go to the bar, you go smoke a joint, you go to the mall, you go to the movies, you go gambling, you pop some Oxycontin, or you go on the street and take some I can never say it, fentanyl. You go to the horse races, you surf the web, Yeah, and that's how you live, that's how you deal with your internal discomfort. And I think for a monastic, you really have to be willing to say, okay, there's internal discomfort here. What is it? Have some curiosity about that too. Why am I uncomfortable? What are the buttons that are getting pushed? How am I looking at this situation that my mind doesn't like it, or I feel threatened by it? Yeah, so some willingness to really look at our own mind and stick with it even when things are uncomfortable. Yeah, and to realize that when you're uncomfortable, the problem is not the Dharma, the problem is not the ordination, the problem is the afflictions. Because if you don't understand that, then when you're going through difficult times, and we all go through difficult times, then you want to disrobe and go off and have a relationship because that makes you feel better. Yeah. And so being willing to accurately assess what is the cause of the discomfort. It's not the ordination, it's not the Dharma. Yeah. It's one's own mind. So some kind of stick-to-itiveness. Yeah. A kind heart never hurts. Yeah. So to have a kind heart towards yourself and to other living beings, that makes being ordained much easier, and it creates a good feeling with other people. Yeah. Because we're not just ordained for our own trip. Yeah. It's not about my practice and how I can improve and how I can attain Buddhahood and how I can overcome all my problems. It's not about me. It's about how do I sustain the Dharma through supporting the transmitted teachings and the realized teachings. Yeah. And so, of course, to sustain the transmitted teachings and the realized teachings, we have to practice. Okay? But we're practicing, when people approach it as like, okay, what's the best place for me to live so that I can hear the kind of teachings I want to have? Where's the most comfortable place for me to stay where I like the rooms and I like the food? Where's the nicest place where they have a nice community, where my teacher is? What ambience is going to make me excel in the Dharma? Yeah, that kind of mind is going to create a problem. Okay? So I think some humility is very, very good, some humility, some willingness to accept being wrong, and to realizing that it's really not all about me, that the monastery, believe it or not, should not make all their policies revolving around what I like. Ah, shucks, Okay. So there's this willingness to, change and be malleable. And a sense of humor, yes. Yes. Yeah, to be willing to laugh at ourselves. That's quite important. And not take ourselves so seriously. Oh, I put the water bowls up in the wrong order. I'm going to go to the hell realms. Oh, I hope nobody else sees that I put the water bowls up in the wrong order. I'm going to lose my whole reputation. It's like, come on. Yeah. Yeah. And there's some ability to be transparent. Yeah, and to laugh at ourselves. Yeah, I put the water bowls up in the wrong order. And you know what else I did? I also didn't wipe them properly before I put them up. And you know what else? I spilled part of the water when I took them down. And I need to be more careful. And life goes on. I'm not going to sit there and beat myself up about it all day and all night.